Hello, a big warm welcome to everyone that has joined so far. We're going to give it another minute to get everyone situated. Just go ahead and make sure you have your ingredients ready if they have arrived. For those of you, if they have not yet arrived, sorry about that. I hear there's some package delays, but hopefully this is something you'll be able to enjoy all winter long. Hopefully, some of you are in the part of the country that's getting a first beautiful snowfall. I know some of you have probably already gotten a couple if you're in the Denver area. All right, we've got a handful of people in here now. Just some housekeeping quickly to go over. All of this is pretty obvious, so if you miss a bit, no worries. But there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the webinar panel here where you guys can enter questions. For the most part, those questions will likely be answered at the end. We'll get a lot of time for Q&A towards the end of this webinar, but if the speakers are able to weave some of the messaging throughout and answer some of those questions throughout, they might do that as well. So go ahead and use the Q&A section down at the bottom there. We will be keeping attendees muted and just having the panelists be the ones who are able to speak. So I think we've got just about as many people as we're expecting. So we'll go ahead and kick things off with a little bit of history of mulled wine from Professor M. Paul Johnson. And M. Paul, make sure you unmute yourself.
Oh, hello and welcome. My name is Professor Emeritus M. Paul Johnson, and I am a specialist at the University of Phoenix remote campus in culinary history. And I'm here to take you, dear viewer, through a journey of mulled wine in anticipation of what promises to be an amazing and insightful webinar that will precede it about how to use content marketing in B2B, business to business. So before we get going, one thing, you should have received a package, as Kate mentioned, that includes the following ingredients. You should receive a bottle of Cabernet, mulling spices, and orange slices, as well as a tumbler to put it in when we're finished. Now, indeed, if some of you have not received it yet, our deepest apologies. Jeff Bezos and the pandemic have combined to suck up the entire capacity of our shipping system in the country, but it will arrive. Now, if you do have wine in your household, a Cabernet, a Pinot Noir would be fine. Of course, alcohol is not required. Cider is perfectly good as well if you would like to abstain. And if you're feeling 2020, as many of us are, feel free to increase the allotment of wine that you're using, as I myself will be doing later. Okay, now, before we actually put these ingredients to work, let's just take a moment and learn about the history of mulled wine. And we'll do that by starting with a quick poll. If we could have the poll up, please. Now, the question is, which actor, comedic actor, is more closely associated with mulled wine? Martin Mull, in the role of Leon Karp in the famous television series Roseanne. I believe Roseanne's boss is who he played. And another American funny man, David Spade, playing the role of Joe Dirt. Again, which one of these American comedic actors in these roles do you believe is more closely associated with mulled wine? Please vote. We'll take a moment to see the results. Oh, it looks like a dead heat between Martin Mull and David Spade. Wow. Well, folks, you're going to learn today. Mr. Martin Mull, despite his name, nothing to do whatsoever with mulled wine. Mr. David Spade, in this particular role, is sporting a haircut known as a mullet. Now, you may be mistaken in the belief that a mullet has something to do specifically in terms of the term with mulled wine. No, it doesn't. But the haircut itself, in fact, the mullet was not introduced into the popular lexicon until the Beastie Boys did it in the 90s. Amazing. Ill Communication, I think, was the album. However, the haircut goes back to ancient times, in fact, ancient Rome. And in ancient Rome, the soldiers wore this particular haircut when they attended the chariot races. For two reasons: it fit under their helmets, and they were imitating their enemies, the Hun, those nomadic tribesmen that had terrorized Rome for so many years. Now, we're in ancient Rome. That's the connection to mulled wine. These Romans had copied the Greeks' practice of heating wine and adding spices for medicinal purposes and the heat to warm them during the cold months, as well as to cook out any impurities. As the Romans conquered Europe, so too did this practice of heating wine with spices, and it continued. And now the term mull was not introduced until the Victorian era. The term is mull to soften the hardness of the wine. And indeed, at that time, Victorian era, where mulled wine was closely associated with the holiday of Christmas. But enough jibber jabber. Let's mull some wine, shall we? Cameraman, if you could pan down to our ingredients. We're going to use the rule of threes today. A 1, 2, 3 pour of wine. 1, 2, 3 orange slices. And you can guess where I'm going from here. 1, 2, 3 sachets of spices. Side factoid: sachets directly follow their invention to that famous Dr. Hippocrates, who invented the practice of putting herbs and pouring and straining it through cloth. So another props to the Greeks, if you will. Now, we have our mixture. A quick stir to make sure the ingredients are together. In terms of the heat, come back up to me. Not too high, low, simmer only, because if we start to boil, the alcohol will cook off. It defeats the purpose. No, it doesn't. We'll go over here to the stove, or your preferred heating method. Of course, I've prepared one in advance, interest of time. Smell, and can you see these aroma? Okay. We'll pour it. Oftentimes a strainer is required, but if you're careful enough, you won't pour the sachets or the hot orange slices onto your hand, which I've done several times in preparation for this. Okay. Smells, it's just delightful, just delightful. Let me take a sip. Ah, yes. So now, whether you call it Glühwein, as the Alsatians do, or Glögg, the Nordics, or Kantau, as the Brasilians do, or if you call it as Ebenezer Scrooge said to Bob Cratchit in Charles Dickens' classic A Christmas Carol, a smoking bishop, please enjoy it as we move into our next section, and mulling strategies for content marketing. I will give it to Bombora co-founder, Mike Burton. Mike, take it away.
Mark, thank you so much. Amazing. I've got mine here. It's delicious. And you're exactly right. Now that we've learned how to mull wine, we're going to mull over content marketing. And mostly, like Mark said, my name's Mike Burton. I'm one of the co-founders of Bombora. I lead a lot of our go-to-market teams. And thanks everyone for joining tonight. I'm really excited. Mostly my job is to let these three great panelists that we have cook and let them tell us all about content marketing and what's going on in that space and what they're seeing out there. So I'll give three really quick introductions, and then I'll ask each of them to kind of expound on their roles and kind of like more specifically what they're working on today. So we have Rachel Rickles with us today. She's a senior content marketing evangelist at LinkedIn. Going to be amazing to have you, Rachel. Excited to learn more about that. Hillary Carpio, director of ABM at Snowflake. Very exciting. And Arturo Siguenza, senior brand manager at Citrix. So thank you guys all so much for joining. And Rachel, if you want to start, just tell us more about what you're doing right now at LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today, Mike. Yes, so my title is quite fancy, content marketing evangelist. But what that means is that we help our clients, some of our top tier clients at LinkedIn, just be better at their content marketing strategies. And that can be both specifically for LinkedIn, but as well as more holistically. So taking a look at what's working, what's not, thinking about content calendars, strategies, content that works for specific audiences, and then aligning that to what these clients currently have and maybe opportunities to create new content that will really resonate with those audiences they're trying to reach.
That's great. And so I think you probably see this topic from lots of different angles and lots of different customers, which is going to be great. And then Hillary, tell us more about what you're up to at Snowflake.
Yeah, so I lead the account-based marketing team at Snowflake. There's about 10 folks on my team who are all aligned to the sales organization. So we surface the needs of sales to create boutique one-to-one campaigns as well as programmatic to meet the needs of the organization and really push the right message at the right time to the right people in those accounts that will yield the biggest impact for the company.
Great, awesome. And how about you, Arturo? What's cooking at Citrix right now?
Yeah, so lots cooking overall. End of the year, I think everyone can relate to the stress. But in terms of what my role is, so I sit underneath the brand and content marketing team and overall manage strategy for our brand campaign, inclusive of creative, as well as overseeing media strategy. So everything from developing the look and feel for our advertising materials and the messaging that we put out there, and then leading the media strategy for what we actually put into market and the channels and tactics that we leverage overall. So overall, a bit of a mix of creative and media, and obviously content infused to both of those.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. And thanks again, guys, for joining. This is really exciting. So yeah, we're thinking about kind of the best places to start here. And one is, okay, we're in this account-based world. And we've all been around and watched the evolution over the last several years in B2B and kind of how we've landed here. So maybe Hillary, you could start giving your role. How is the world of content marketing different or how has it evolved in this account-based world that we all live in now versus potentially a more traditional or legacy approach to content?
Yeah, so I've spoken on this in the past as well about how we take content marketing and start an ABM strategy versus mature an ABM strategy. And I think, you have your main content marketing strategy for the company, but in terms of ABM, it starts getting more and more granular into how can we categorize the content in the most relevant way for our targets. So for some early on in their ABM journey, it's going to be just by industry. For some a little further along, it might be by industry and then persona. And then for those that are really deep into the ABM journey, you're going to see some more of that one-to-one content as well, from content in the form of ebooks and white papers to messaging you see in advertisements to specific webinars held for one company or one event for one company. So it's really a spectrum across what it really means. But as marketers, I think it's up to us to figure out how do we make the most of what we have that's coming out of the brand goals and the company goals and focus it into those accounts in a meaningful way.
Sure. So aside from, let's say, personalizing a piece of content for a specific company, say Acme Corporation, go beyond that one step. So what's an example of a personalized piece of content you create for one particular account that maybe goes beyond just kind of how you're, personalizing the cover and kind of presenting it, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, so when I say personalized content, I don't mean adding the name to something. So when we talk about targeting ads with the company name that all point to a generic page, for me, that's not account-based marketing, that's account-based targeting. So when we're talking about account-based content, we personally at our company leverage Bombora a lot for the intent to figure out with the sales rep, what conversations have they had in the account, and then what intent is surging. And then that way we can cater the content. And we don't do one-to-one for content for every single account, but in some of these really large major accounts, that's where you'll see that. It'll be focusing on a specific workload that we find they might be interested in. If we're already in the account, we're looking at a specific line of business to expand. It can be looking at who are the buying leaders in that line of business and what type of content do they need. We sell across a lot of different titles, so it can get to that level. Can talk about competitive takeout, and you start pulling these puzzle pieces together and you get a really unique piece of content that talks about what is that company's struggle, what is that company's future, and for us, what does it mean to move into the data cloud, which we see as the future in our industry.
Hillary, I love that you called out that oftentimes marketers conflate the two of account-based targeting and account-based marketing, because that is, I think, a really key differentiator between the two. So thank you so much for calling that out. It's a really important key takeaway, I think, from this. One thing I'll add to that, if you don't mind, is thinking about, you so elegantly said, the idea of looking at the challenge of the client and then customizing content based on that challenge. And it's really important when you're thinking about account-based marketing in that way, not only on a one-to-one scale, but even if you're doing a one-to-few. Programmatic is a bit tough to do this with, but if you can identify the kind of common challenges or commonalities across a multitude of accounts that you're trying to break into, then you can create content to account for those specific challenges that are reaching a larger audience or a larger account list than just maybe the one-to-one. So that's something to think about too when you're thinking about your content strategy.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about this in general. So this idea of, let's say you've got the account, you've got the right personas and the right use cases and the right business challenges. So those puzzle pieces, as you said, Hillary, and let's say you've created the perfect piece of content. Is it all about the salespeople and the account people getting that piece of content in front of those stakeholders, or can such a handcrafted piece of content that's designed for maybe 10 or 20 people get effectively delivered in other ways? I guess short question is, what are the best delivery channels for such a highly curated piece of content?
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's all about knowing your audience. And this is why I live in the account-based marketing world, is because we are so specific and granular in what we do. But at one account, it could be an advertisement, right? Pointing to a page that has a custom piece of content that pops up to engage them. Other accounts, it could be that we have a partner that we work with and they have a connection who's a thought leader in that account, and it might be seeing the content through a partner. It could be doing good old-fashioned direct mail once COVID is over to actually drop the piece of content on their desk. There's all different ways we can go about it and think about it. But it really, I think, has to be tailored to who the person is you're trying to get it in front of. A C-level versus a manager are going to be receive content differently.
Sure. Yeah, no, and we got to some of this along the way, but another thing we wanted to cover is just how you think about engaging buying committees. It sounds like in your world, hey, every account, it's not just a matter of there's always one of these different personas. One account might be all about a data science persona, another account might be cross-functional, but how do you guys think about buying committees on an account by account basis?
Yeah, so we pride ourselves on the relationship we have with our sales team. So we really let them guide our strategy for account-based marketing. And we'll run different campaigns depending on the funnel stage. It could just be broad-based awareness, or it could be, hey, we've already got a champion in this organization. Let's target our ABM on every other title that once the conversation gets to that final stage, the CFO who's going to be making a financial decision, the CMO who's going to be using data from a marketing perspective, let's make sure they know who Snowflake is and that they're comfortable with us as a brand, so that it's not the first time they've heard of us when we get to that position. So that's one way we think about how to target the whole buying committee. But again, it's on my team in particular, it's a one-by-one basis. Now we have an incredible demand gen team, an incredible content team as well. They're also working really hard to get Snowflake out there. But for ABM, it's account by account.
Got it.
And that is important to note too, because LinkedIn has actually shown or done some research where on average across all industries, the buying committee has now increased in number to, I think it's 10 folks are involved in the buying journey. And so it is really important to think about not just, C-suite or, one particular function at a company that is making that decision, because that's not the case. It goes across functions as well as across seniorities and titles. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're thinking about account-based marketing.
I think that's a really good point, Rachel, as well, because I think that sometimes we think that there is just a very small buying committee that's following us across the buyer journey as well. We're speaking to the same person as they're moving from awareness down into education, consideration, and decision, when realistically it could be 10 people, it could be 20 people, right? As you're moving from awareness down into consideration, right? It does get smaller and smaller as you get down to that decision. But you could be dealing with a larger group of execs when you're at the awareness level, and then you start moving down into some of those more research level leaders that come into the buying process. And so I think that from an ABM perspective, you have to think about how you're using the information that you have about the account, their profile, solutions that they've been interested in, the intent signals that they're showing, to be able to understand how you can craft a content experience for that expanded audience set. So I think that that's a really, really interesting point. And just thinking about the buying committee as something that is sometimes quite large, right? It's not just a very narrow group.
Sure, and this is hitting on this great idea that at different stages of a buyer's process, the committee may look very different, right? And it probably varies in different spaces, but the beginning could be a big committee of people and it gets smaller. It could go the other way. I guess I'll ask you, Rachel, since you're working with lots and lots of different types of customers in different sectors, how are you thinking about the buyer's journey as it relates to content creation? I think we've all come to be self-aware in this space that the idea of the linear content journey is a little silly, right? It's there's like all these things that are happening like crazy. It's like, oh, they must be in market, or these things that seem really passive, but so they must not be that interested. But the reality is we probably don't have a perfect picture of it. How given that, how do you approach it from a content perspective?
Absolutely. As you just said, the buying journey is messy. People are in and out of awareness and decision making content all the time. There is no real linear journey, and especially when as Arturo was just mentioning, especially when you start to add people into that mix. People are going to forward content via email, via social, all different channels, and so you're going to get hits, if you will, as a marketer, thinking, oh, I have this great lead because they've engaged with my piece of content. But that may not necessarily be true. They're just trying to learn a little bit more about your brand and your solution that is going to help them. And what I often share with clients is that it's about adding value, not necessarily just based on what stage of the funnel you're thinking this audience member might be in, but really, what are you trying to share with this audience that is going to be valuable to them? So it comes back to the customer challenges and making sure that you're really clear on what those pain points are and what those challenges are, so that you can really add value to that audience. In a lot of cases, it's interestingly, we don't think about B2B being emotional in any way, but a lot of the content that has seemed to resonate really well, especially in this year, is more emotional based content. How are you going to help someone be more productive, be more efficient? How are you going to, kind of help solve some of the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis? There are a lot of these questions, and people have a lot on their minds right now. So if we can be empathetic in the content that we're providing, whether it's account-based marketing or not, I think that is really critical to success.
And Rachel,
does that help answer the question? Sorry, Hillary, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to your point, I can answer this question from William about what is account-based marketing, but to your point about being empathetic and thinking, how do we value the time of those people who are consuming our content? that's the premise for account-based marketing, is taking content, providing it in a way that is specific and valuable to an individual. And whether that's at a one-to-one or one-to-many level, I think everyone has their opinion on what ABM really is and the thresholds. I don't think it really matters. At the end of the day, if you're focusing your resources into an account in a way that's meaningful to them at whatever level that is, it's account-based marketing, it's account-based everything. The definition doesn't matter. It's just good marketing and good marketing practices.
That's great. I think so. Maybe you guys aren't going this far, but the idea is that we're starting with the wrong question. Maybe we shouldn't be starting with, hey, what stage or where do we think they are, and how do we kind of leverage that? The question is, how can we be helpful?
Yeah.
And if we're really, really helpful and we're good at that, then kind of the stage doesn't matter so much. Would you go that far that it's irrelevant?
That is a good question. I think stage does matter, but I think that we put too much of an emphasis on it today. I think that if we are offering helpful, valuable, empathetic content, we're going to see down funnel metrics. I recently, there seems to be a really strong emphasis on this data-driven marketing, which I have no argument against. With that said, I think we tend to measure the wrong things. Like, we continue to look at cost per lead, and I'm going to be a bit contrarian here. We continue to measure cost per lead as kind of our gold star. That is what we are going to follow. But how many of those leads are actually turning into opportunities? How many, what does the velocity to close rate look like? What is the lifetime customer value? I think these are all questions that a lot of the reason why ABM was adopted in the first place was because it helps answer some of those questions, those down funnel metrics. And today we're just putting too much of the emphasis on, almost the upper funnel of demand gen, which is simply the CPL. So if we focus too much there, then we lose sight of what we're actually trying to help our customers solve. And that is the big question. Arturo, it looks like you had something to add to that.
No, I'm like praising you for everything you said, but I do think that stages do matter. But I think that the way that we think about stages is this: our audience is going to move through this awareness tactic, then they're going to move into this next stage, and they're going to consume this piece of content, and they're going to do this, and they're going to contact sales, and then they're going to become pipeline. I think that linear idea of the stages that we put across in our buyer journey is just not a reality anymore. Our targets are moving through different stages at different times. Sometimes they're consuming different stages at one moment in time, right? They're consuming awareness level content while they're also still consuming consideration and decision level content. But I think that it's important for us to lay that out to understand what we need to provide to our audiences. And something that we do at Citrix is that we created what we call a connection strategy. It's a bit of an omni-channel framework, which ultimately lays out the media, content, and creative that we support for each of our stages and maps it out holistically across brands to demand. And that enables us to see, okay, what content are we using to support this mindset that an audience is and what they need in order to support the challenges that they're facing at a specific stage. But what we've also seen is that audiences jump through these stages very quickly. We actually executed a program with the New York Times, where it was a third-party content program that we published on the New York Times. It was these really great videos around how work has really evolved in the post-COVID world and how technology has really helped organizations really transform their operating model for their employees and enabled them to really work anywhere. But they were high-level pieces of content. We profiled customers, but we didn't necessarily advise them to talk about Citrix, but they ultimately did, just in how they enabled their organizations to move to remote work models. But then, as we were seeing users engage with that content through the pixel implementation that we had on the site and through some of the media tactics, we actually saw that those audiences were consuming that and then actually really going into our own site and consuming down funnel content. conversions across our share file solutions. So it was really interesting just to see that, this was one of our really, really high level awareness pieces of concept, but they jumped down into a lower state of the funnel. So I think it's interesting for us to think through. It's not a linear journey. It's really just lay it out all out there for them and let them experience it at their own time.
That's interesting. So, and what do you do when that happens, when the customer's behavior kind of subverts your expectations? Okay, so you've got this big branding campaign. It's like, hey, this is high level, this is awareness. And then the audience starts behaving like real prospects. Is it like, how do you react? You're not going to only start running big branding campaigns and assuming they're all going to convert into really down funnel leads. So what do you do with that, with a finding like that?
Yeah, so that has helped us kind of understand the stronger connecting points that we need to make with our demand counterparts. But I think that the learning there is not necessarily that it's causing any huge strategic pivots, because like I said, with that map of the different content media and creative activity that we had going on across the board, these audiences were engaging with our brand campaigns, but then we're finding our demand campaigns on their own. So I don't necessarily think that it's something that completely pivoted it, but it just enforced and validated that this brand activity wasn't just fluffy pictures, nice billboards. It was something that was directly leading to lower funnel conversations. So I think it was more of like a validation tool that we need to continuously invest in those higher level pieces, because they do have down funnel impacts.
Very cool. And then maybe to put a bow on this section, one thing that's going on in my brain as we talk about this stuff is like, maybe there's this stage called, they've been educated, they're engaged with us, they're an opportunity in our system, we're talking to them. And to Rachel's point, to be helpful to that audience is different because they know stuff. And then to be really, really helpful to the rest of the universe that isn't talking to you at all, or hasn't been educated, is a whole different form of helpfulness. But maybe in a lot of ways, it's just two stages. If you're thinking about it through the help model. And then, Rachel, you just got to figure out a cost per help metric.
Exactly. That's the tough part, right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we as marketers face, is that we do have to go back to the CFO at the end of the year to say, give us more budget because, this worked. Well, how did it work? What is that? What is that ROI? So I understand the pain that a lot of marketers are facing in terms of measurement, but that is actually, there's another team within LinkedIn called the B2B Institute. And one of the things that they talk about is that there are two stages. There's in market and out of market. Now, the way that you're positioning it is a little bit different, where there are prospects and there are those that are already kind of almost in that consideration-ish. There's like, don't know about us, do know about us. You can frame it however you want to, but again, it is the stages, if you will, are not quite as important as the challenges as we've been discussing. And it seems like there was maybe a question around how to create empathetic content, which I'll just touch on here if you don't mind. There's a really simple exercise that you can take back to your marketing team. It's called an empathy map, and if you could just look it up online, there are a lot of different templates for it. Also, if you take a look, if you have Mural or Miro, some of those online whiteboard tools, there are also templates available there. But it essentially just outlines, from the voice of the customer, from the perspective of the customer, what are they thinking and feeling and seeing and hearing and doing and saying today in this year or this month, whatever it might be. And you want to do that for each of your core audiences that you're trying to reach, so that you can have a persona, essentially, as Hillary was mentioning earlier, built out for each of these and understand the challenges from that customer's perspective or from that prospect's perspective. So that's what I would recommend to build out empathetic content.
So Rachel, it sounds like from my perspective, when you're talking about empathetic content, it feels like we're listening. So instead of pushing and pushing and talking, it's shifting the brand to a listening position. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. And if you were to talk to any design thinking certified, professional, they would say, actually go on listening tours to your customers, and not just your sales team, because you want to get it straight from the horse's mouth, if you will, because your sales team still has a lens that they put on what they're hearing from their clients and customers and prospects. So really talking direct to the customers to hear what their challenges are, so that you have that direct connection, and then you can then extrapolate that and build content that's relevant.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's really good.
In the
Hillary, about,
oh, sorry, Arturo, were you gonna add?
I was just going to say one thing about Hillary's comment, because I think that she made a really good quotable statement that was just about like, we're like speaking to our targets, but we're also speaking to them about ourselves. It's like, our company does this, our company is the best at that, but we're not necessarily in that Flipside perspective of our customers need this, and this is how we solve that challenge for them. So I think that flipping of the perspective, especially in building empathetic content, it's not necessarily just, it is about understanding your audiences and listening to them, but it's also about how you're then reflecting that in the messaging that you're portraying to them. Using empathetic messaging to be able to show them that you understand their challenges, you're listening to them, and this is how you're coming in to solve those challenges.
That's great. And I think Hillary's in an enviable position here. Is like, it's a lot of it's built into your process of what you're trying to do. I mean, so if you weren't listening to what the salespeople and the partners were telling you about the specific account, and then crafting content for it, it's kind of just built into your process, which is great. And then it seems like more and more today, some of this listening can be done with data. Like there are different strategies, and more, it's like this content creation is becoming this art and this science simultaneously. And so, Arturo, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how you guys approach using data in your content strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say that we are definitely still on a journey when it comes to like the gold mine of leveraging data to inform our content strategy. But I think overall, I would categorize it in a few different buckets. So I think that there is data that we leverage to inform content production. So going out into listening tools, like social listening tools, to understand what themes are resonating in the market, using intent partners like Bombora to understand what topics our companies are searching for, what they're surging against relative to our solution set, and all of that to ultimately inform how we're building out content to align to what's relevant to our audiences at the time. But then I think that there's also the matter of taking in-market learnings as well. I think that one key thing that I'll advise to marketers working with content teams is that often when that happens is that the content team produces a bunch of amazing content. They take all of the advice and they produce it, but then it goes out to the demand teams, it goes out to the brand teams, and then the content team doesn't know anything about it. It's just like, did it get the light of day? Did it not? Did it perform well? And so I think a big thing is about also creating those lines of communication with your content team so that you can give them the insights that they need to continuously optimize the content strategy to support your campaigns and to better serve the overall buyer journey. So I think that it's a method of infusing them with the research and insights and intent data to be able to produce the content, but then also keeping the content team informed as your campaigns go into market and perform well or don't, so that they can continuously support you in a strategic way.
That's great. Anything to add, Hillary or Rachel, on this data topic?
Yeah, I'd love to take the opportunity to answer a question that came in from the chat around how to create personalized content quicker, because it ties into this data perspective. So something we do at Snowflake and are continuing to evolve is how to create one-to-one content quicker. So just for reference, we have about 2,000 one-to-one campaigns that we run in any given quarter. So that's very high volume, despite having a large team. That's still a lot to keep up. So when you look at the different data points, if you can tie those to different puzzle pieces of data, so whether it's Bombora surge cluster that ties to a workload, whether it's an industry, whatever it is to start building these snippets. So if you consider like building a piece of content that's interchangeable and dynamic, then you can start plugging and playing who is a competitor, what is the topic they're interested in, what customer quote fits with this, and start bundling them in these different fashions. You can also leverage technology, the better this personalization technology gets to serve those snippets in and really create one-to-one content. So I'm a big believer in leverage the technology you have. In my previous role, I built ABM by myself. I targeted several thousand accounts and there was only one of me and it was part of my job, right? So you just have to make do with what we have and leverage what we have to get there.
That's great. Yeah, it's back to your puzzle pieces that's what keeps, right? It's like, it seems like you have the puzzle pieces already off to the side and you can just grab them and be nimble. And that's great. Rachel, you must see a wide range of customers that are maybe very data driven in how they create content and maybe not at all. What are you seeing from your kind of catbird seat there at LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are, a ton of integrations available for the clients that I work with, and intent data is a big piece of that. As Arturo was mentioning earlier, it's that can be a signal for or kind of a listening signal for how to create empathetic content. So I think that's a really key piece of it, and I love what Hillary was talking about too. In creating this personalized content and using the data that you have or the technologies that you have. You don't have to go out and spend a ton of money on net new technology. I think it's just a matter of kind of doing an audit. What do you have currently? And what are you not maximizing? And is there an opportunity there to capitalize on your existing technologies to create and distribute this relevant content that matters to your audience? So there's a lot of different things to look at. So I know that's broad strokes answer, but I think that would be a key takeaway from here is what Hillary said. Just look at what you have and maximize the technologies.
Yeah, and Arturo, you bring up this great idea. I think what you're saying is that, okay, it's almost easier in some ways to use data and insights to create the content. And then would you say it's more difficult to then measure of all of those great pieces of content you've created, which ones are actually resonating through the channels that you distribute them? So that's almost like your first party content data. Is that harder to wrangle than the data you're using to create the content?
Yeah, specifically like within our content marketing or organization, they serve a variety of different teams across the org. They serve our demand teams, which leverage content in a variety of different ways, from driving users to the site, from syndicating content through different partners to generate leads. They serve our brand marketing team, which ultimately does a variety of different channel tactics to also do third-party content versus owned. But wrangling that information for them, it can often be difficult. But I think that what we've been able to do with our content marketing team, who is fantastic. By the way, they do a really, really great job at just being able to wrangle the cats that are at Citrix. But they created dashboards to be able to plug in all of this information. So they have a GA dashboard that's able to aggregate site level activity of all of the content pieces that have a specific landing page dedicated to them to be able to track the metrics that they need to. And then what we also do in terms of the performance readouts that we have for our marketing campaigns is we try to help give them additional insights on what's performing well. So that's where we kind of start layering in some of the additional intent partners that we have, or account-based analytics partners that we leverage to be able to let them know, this piece of content, not only did it have a tremendous amount of page views, great average time on site, but we also saw a surge in the volume of accounts that this piece of content resonated with. And then you can layer on top of that, these accounts are of X profile, they're this particular industry. So maybe in the future, you should actually build more verticalized content, because it seems like this content piece really resonated with this audience, right? So I think it's about the build that you create in terms of the variety of different data sources that you're bringing in. And like Hillary said, making it snackable, because it can be often really overwhelming. We have so much data available to us now, and it can be really hard to get down to what really matters and how to feed that to the appropriate team so that they can act.
And if you don't mind, I'll just add on to that really quickly. We're talking a lot about content and personalized content, and I don't want folks on the line to feel overwhelmed that there's going to be or need to be a ton of resources and investment in net new content. I think there's a lot that can be done with your existing content. Again, doing an audit of your content as well as your technology will help you maximize your existing resources. So keep that in mind. It doesn't always have to be net new. You can repurpose content. You can break it down like the big rock concept. There's a lot of different things that you can do to, again, kind of maximize what you have existing. So I don't want folks on the line to feel overwhelmed that this sounds like a ton of content that has to be created net new.
And remember, we're ignoring stages now. So that
right.
reduce the amount, right? I mean, instead of 5 stages and all the content, we can forget about that. Cool. I know we still have some questions in the chat that we want to get to. So maybe we could buzz through those quickly in the next couple of minutes before we wrap. And Kate, maybe you could help us figure out which ones of everything that's come in we've already covered. I don't know if you guys have access to it there as well. I see this one here. What's the most successful one-to-one ABM campaign you've ever run? It seems like a good one for Hillary.
I think about that. Most successful one-to-one campaign. I won't name a specific account, partially for privacy and partially just to keep this a little bit broader, but our most successful campaigns are those that have the most buy-in from the reps. So we have an example was shared this morning where the rep is bringing in who their champion is and really developing them as a champion. What can we provide them in terms of assets to help evangelize within their organization? Bringing in partners where it makes sense, whether it's GSI or different types of partners we work with. They can bring those in to help build those relationships. Bringing in field marketing where it makes sense to have these custom events, bringing in demand gen to hit the different audiences. I mean, it's just a team effort. So when we bring all of those teams together, that's when we're going to have these most successful one-to-one campaigns. And so one doesn't look like another, but that's the commonality. And I think that ties into the question about, do you need a tiger team to do ABM? Yes and no. I think sometimes when you say, will you be on an ABM team or an ABM tiger team, the word freaks people out for some reason. It's like, I don't have time for that. That's too much. It's too complicated. Can't make more content. I can't do all these things. When in reality, it's just, for me, it's building advocates across the organization. So, Snowflake is an ABM first company. I'm very fortunate to be a part of it. That's not always how it's been in my career. So in the past, it's been, hey, here's an idea. I know that the head of the SDR org, for example, is really into this same type of marketing. So it's going to them and saying, hey, I want to get more specific and more targeted to get better results in what we're doing. Are you on board? And running a program with them that's a more targeted campaign without naming it ABM necessarily. Then you prove your value, and then you go over to the marketing ops organization and say, hey, we just did this, was really impactful. Would you help us build some dashboards that show that, right? And then you gather these advocates along your way so that you do essentially build a tiger team, but you're just quietly building a team of people who are excited about getting better results with not less effort, but more targeted approaches and better used budget. So that's my approach.
It's like ninja marketing, Hillary.
So I call myself the Roomba vacuum cleaner. I just go in one direction until I hit a wall. If it doesn't work, I just turn around and I go another direction, and I just keep bouncing around until I figure it out, right? And that's, I think, how we have to be in the new age of marketing, is just be resilient and creative.
That's great. So I wanted to get, there's one other topic we wanted to get to. We thought the best way might be through a poll. We want to know, kind of looking forward, what are the biggest challenges to executing all of this stuff? So if we could put up the poll, and we'll get a gut check from the audience first as a launching off point, and then I'll ask you guys to just kind of go around the horn, and we could just do quick takeaways on this question as well.
And while we're getting the poll, Hillary, I'd love to ask you a question based on this. What was the biggest challenge that you had in setting up your ABM program at Snowflake, or was there any challenges that you had to face?
Yeah, so ABM existed when I joined Snowflake about a year ago, but we've transformed the way ABM works into a full funnel organization. And we've really started partnering with our SDR org to say, how can we warm these accounts up so that by the time, and I apologize if you hear the background noise, hopefully you can still hear me, but how do we warm these accounts up so that when you reach out to them, you are using your time in the most effective way? So that's been one of our big challenges, but really big rewards, is how to connect ourselves, not just with AE, but with the SDR, and create this full campaign cycle to do so. So it's a big transformation on, not just how we work together, but how we measure, how we scale, how we do all of these things. So that's been a big focus for us this year.
Great. And so, yeah, probably in predictable fashion, we have a pretty good split on the poll results. I don't know if everyone can see them or just me. But at misaligned goals at 15%, process challenges at 25%, execution at 15%, and then the biggest piece of the pie is everything. All of those things at almost half. So let's just go around the horn. Arturo, I'll start with you. What do you think are the biggest challenges here, and what do you take from the poll results?
So I would agree. It's definitely all of the above. But I think that they're all really connected to one another, right? I think that if you don't have aligned goals as a marketing team of what you're going after, you're going to ultimately have process challenges, and the execution is going to be really difficult. So I think that starting from the top of just aligning on when you're setting up an ABM campaign, making sure that there is alignment across the parties that are going to be involved on the goals for that campaign and the swim lanes for who's responsible for delivering on each of those, so that then you can create a process to support that, and then implement an execution plan that will ultimately get you to achieving all of the above. But I do think that the goals aspect of it is the crux that I would recommend. If you are launching a campaign, make sure that the team, whether that's a tiger team, whether that's something that's larger, has a shared vision that's pushing them forward in order to be able to orchestrate the program that they need to.
Great. Hillary?
And I'll add to that really quickly, if you don't mind. In addition to the marketing team being aligned on goals, as Hillary was just mentioning, making sure you're aligned with the sales teams, because when you're launching an ABM program, having the sales buy-in is really critical. So making sure that there's alignment on what an MQL is, an SQL, et cetera, is going to be really important to the overall success of your program.
Yeah, so I can wrap it up. I mean, we had a chat the other day, right, prepping for this, and talked about this alignment of goals. And just in the few days, I've really taken that to heart, and really was able to turn around a program just yesterday, really thinking about how we align across multiple organizations. So I hope the people on this webinar can get that same takeaway and make that progress as well. But I think my kind of final point here is, when we think about doing content, when we think about fixing all of the challenges on that poll, it can feel just really overwhelming and feel like we're boiling the ocean. So I think it's just like, think about what works for you and your organization, and just start really simple. Like, what do you have? What is the next step? Once you accomplish that, move to step 2, and then move to step 3. And starting with goals, I agree with Arturo, that's the place to start. But we just have to make it manageable, or we sit back and go, I don't have the resources, I don't have the time, I don't have the budget, and we're full of excuses to why we can't, instead of finding one reason at a time of why we can.
It's like they're all failure points maybe, but the highest order is the goals. And if everybody's aligned on the goals and then execution fails, it's like, okay, we didn't execute. But you can't say, it was like, well, he thought we were doing one thing, she thought we were doing another thing, and we were just never aligned. So that one makes sense to me. I'll buy that. Rachel, do you have any? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so let's be realistic, and this isn't necessarily true of the organization I sit in today, but in past organizations I've sat in, sometimes people don't align on goals, right? And that's, you can be sitting there going, well, that's never going to happen. They don't want to do ABM. And then that's when we have to do something to prove that this works. And we do what we can within our role that we have control over, get the data, and then start doing what I was talking about getting that buy-in, so that you can get to the point where everybody's in the same belief system that this is the goal we should be aligned to.
That's good. Yeah, there you go. That's very true. So sometimes you need to go and execute without aligning on goals, because it's impossible. And you need to get small wins kind of in your own silo, just to get to the point where you can align on goals. Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you. Rachel, did you have any final thoughts on this?
No, I think that was a great wrap.
Okay, great. Well, first to the panelists, thank you guys so much for joining. Really great insights, and thanks for hitting all of this stuff with us. And to all those that came out, I hope it was useful for you and enjoyed the wine. And if you didn't get it tonight, even better, because you can look forward to it in a week or two. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks.